From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana.
Under the Trump administration, we are reasserting American power in a very powerful way in our home region. And our home region is very different than it was just a short while ago.
For most of us, New Year's resolutions might focus on exercise or reading more. For Donald Trump, his New Year's plan seems to involve reshaping the map of the world. He certainly began 2026 with a bang.
President Trump says the U.S. carried out large-scale strikes on Venezuela overnight.
It was a force against a heavily fortified military fortress in the heart of Caracas to bring outlaw dictator Nicolas Maduro to justice.
One country down, and he shows no sign of stopping. Just 2 days later, flying to a military base on Air Force One, he held an impromptu press conference in the cramped cabin, where he unveiled what sounded like his foreign policy wish list.
Cuba looks like it's ready to fall. Colombia is very sick, too, run by a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the United States. And he's not going to be doing it very long, let me tell you. And by the way, you have to do something with Mexico. Mexico has to get their act together because they're pouring through Mexico. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security.
So which country has President Trump set his sights on next? And what is America's new foreign policy?
They now call it the Donroe Doctrine, I don't know. Under our new national security strategy, American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again.
What is the Donroe Doctrine? And how do we make sense of the new rules governing geopolitics and the new world order as Donald Trump is reshaping it? The Story today, the Donroe Doctrine explained. Where will Trump strike next?
The extraordinary thing is that I, for a period of several weeks, had been writing about these drug boat attacks. It looked like this was going to be the first of a long operation to tackle the drug cartels because all the drugs were coming into America and young American people were dying. And he chose Venezuela because he didn't like Maduro, the president who'd been a sort of dictator for many years in Venezuela and basically ruined the country. So in a way, not surprising. What was surprising, of course, was the huge armada of ships and other military forces that were built up in the area.
Michael Evans was the defense editor of The Times for 12 years, and he spent 3 years as our Pentagon correspondent, watching the American system up close. But despite his years of experience, as he tracked the military build-up around Venezuela at the end of last year, none of it seemed to make much sense.
So we had an aircraft carrier, the Gerald R. Ford, the most sophisticated and largest supercarrier in the world. And troops were sent to Puerto Rico. There were helicopters everywhere, transport aircraft. So I posed the question at the time, what is this all about? Is this about regime change? Washington was saying, no, we're not interested in regime change. So all this time while we were focusing on the drug boats, a lot of stuff was going on behind the scenes which none of us knew anything about. Trump managed to do this particular operation in a matter of hours, and successfully so, and changed the world.
We did a whole episode on this, so do go back and listen if you haven't heard it. But it is still playing out. We're still watching the fallout. Any quick predictions on where this leaves Venezuela? What next?
A lot will depend on whether the new President Rodriguez, whether she plays ball. I mean, most extraordinary, Donald Trump has effectively said to her, do as I tell you to do, and everything will be all right. She and her brother George come from the Maduro era. They are Maduro fans. They're not particularly nice people, but somehow Trump and his officials have managed to persuade her to run the country on behalf of the United States, which is rather bizarre. Of course, also Trump has the option, and he's relayed this quite clearly, that if the new government in Caracas doesn't play ball, then he will just mount more strikes.
We were prepared to do a second strike if we needed. We're totally prepared.
But that's off the table.
We're still prepared.
That's off the table now.
No, it's not. If they don't behave, we will do a second strike.
And by the way, remember, this vast armada is still there, and therefore that threat is pretty obvious. The only other thing, of course, that has happened, which is important, is that Maduro and his wife have appeared in the New York court and have pleaded not guilty. Ex-President Maduro said he was a decent man. He says he's got nothing to do with drugs and he is innocent and he's a prisoner of war, effectively.
So while we watch the fallout from Venezuela, and we know that the threat of further strikes still hangs over the country, in the meantime, Donald Trump seems to be threatening a whole bunch of other countries too. I mean, just talk us through the recent list.
There is an interesting list topped by Greenland. Then potentially we have Mexico, Colombia, Cuba. It's very easy to play around with this, and it all sounds very adventurous. But I think there is some substance to it, particularly, of course, Greenland.
We'll get into each of those countries in depth in a moment. Before we do, though, he's been saying many of these things for a while. I think over the last year, people heard these threats to places like Greenland and sort of almost laughed them off because they seemed so preposterous. And yet they're clearly not. Nobody expected him to do a raid on Venezuela, and yet here we are. If you want to understand his view of the world and his foreign policy, I suppose you have to go back to the substance. And while talking about Venezuela, he's been talking an awful lot about what he's calling the Donroe Doctrine. So just tell us about that. How does the new US administration, the Trump administration, see the world?
Before I go back to the Monroe or Donroe Doctrine, not that long ago, the White House published their national security strategy document, which is only about 20 pages long. And it caused a huge reaction around the world because it appeared to say that the most important thing is the Western Hemisphere, the backyard of America. This is Central America, Latin America, South America. The point that he was making was that he feels he has the right and the need to make sure that the Western Hemisphere, the closest countries to America, should be under his sphere of influence. And this goes back to the Monroe Doctrine.
What is the Monroe Doctrine?
We're talking about obviously a completely different era when Europe was empire building. America was, beginning to appear as a country, as a major player, but was very much second place to the Europeans. There was a lot of colonization going on. And when President James Monroe became the President of the United States, he decided that enough was enough. And he produced this deal, if you like, which said, if you stop colonizing anything in the Western Hemisphere, I will not cause any problems for Europe and you can get on and do what you want. The most important thing, by the way, is that these particular colonies of the Europeans, many of them had won independence. And therefore, I think President Monroe thought there was a danger that having acquired independence, Europe might just come back and recolonize. So that was the Monroe Doctrine, and it survived. It was added to by President Theodore Roosevelt, who said in the early 20th century that America would have the right to intervene in Latin America if it felt it was required. So the sort of groundwork, if you like, was laid for what Donald Trump is doing today, which is why he's called it, or some people have called it, the Donroe Doctrine, because he's now said the Western Hemisphere is ours, and we intend to make sure that they are on our side, that they are not being interfered with. And, of course, this message is really made to China and Russia. And so any of the other countries that may fall into this sort of definition of what his foreign policy is will now await and see what happens to them.
To understand how the Monroe Doctrine played out in the past and therefore how we might understand American foreign policy going forward, just talk us through how America has intervened in parts of Central and Latin America over the past century or so.
Let's just look at, for instance, the Nixon era. The Nixon era took on Chile. They sent the CIA in because Chile was then being led by Salvador Allende, who was a socialist and Marxist, no doubt, in the view of Nixon. And they wanted him gone. And sure enough, Allende was toppled and there was a military coup. And the rather ghastly Pinochet was put in charge. Nicaragua has been constantly under the influence of America. They've sent in troops, and under President Reagan, Grenada was invaded because it was turning Marxist. And again, there was worry that it would be linked to countries like Cuba and the Soviet Union. And there have been numerous other examples. So Trump's intervention today is part of a long history of intervention across Latin America by the United States.
That is a theory that seems to come up against our idea of the rules-based system. It does feel like it is a return to an earlier version of foreign policy. And it's also a very worrying sign for many of America's NATO allies, because suddenly it does seem like the old rules-based system. You know, the idea of sovereignty seems quite quaint now. If you're part of what Donald Trump considers his sphere of influence, sovereignty is kind of over. And that is being demonstrated most in Greenland.
Do you expect to take an action against Greenland?
Well, I don't want to talk about Greenland. Let's talk about Venezuela, Russia, Ukraine. We'll worry about Greenland in about 2 months.
Tell us why Greenland has become so important to him.
Two main things. One, he wants to take over because he says it's strategically most important and it needs for the national security.
I will say this about Greenland. We need Greenland from a national security situation. It's so strategic.
It couldn't be in a better position, if you like, for monitoring and countering China and Russia investing in the Arctic.
Greenland is covered with Russian and Chinese ships all over the place. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security. And Denmark is not going to be able to do it, I can tell you. You know what Denmark did recently to boost up security in Greenland? They added one more dog sled. It's true.
But it's also absolutely full of rare earth minerals, absolutely key to the future for technology, for weapon systems, for mobile phones and for everything else. And China has more rare earths and its production, refinery of it, than anyone else in the world. So he needs his own stock, if you like, and Greenland's got a ready-made supply. They've also got oil, apparently, off Greenland, like Venezuela, of course, which is has the largest oil reserves in the world. So, yeah, that is always behind it. And, of course, Greenland has not tapped this vast resources for environmental reasons. Greenland it's about, 9 times the size of the United Kingdom. But about 80% of it is covered in ice, so it's not the ideal country to colonize, if that's the right word. But it has got all these resources, and Trump would like to get his hands on it.
And that ice is now melting.
Yes.
Donald Trump has been interested in it for a while. He hasn't always talked about waging war, though. I mean, he talked last time he was in power about buying Greenland.
Essentially, it's a large real estate deal. A lot of things could be done. It's hurting Denmark very badly because they're losing almost $700 million a year carrying it. So they carry it at a great loss.
First of all, we're not going to have a war in Greenland. It's just not going to happen.
Really?
There can't be a war because if Trump transfers the mighty armada from off Venezuela to Greenland, there's not a lot anyone can do. NATO can't do anything. Denmark's got, 9,000 troops in its army?
Yeah.
And anyway, you're not going to have NATO versus NATO. It's just not going to happen. So the military element of it will be the leverage as opposed to the use of force.
So when the White House talks about it, it's the threat of it they're relying on.
It's leverage, that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's the threat of it. They don't need to invade Greenland. It would be highly embarrassing for Denmark, obviously, and it would be disastrous for NATO, but they don't need to do it. I mean, they've already got a huge base in northwest of Greenland, which is monitoring missiles, so it's an early missile warning system. They've already got that there. They've got jurisdictional rights in that area. So all they need to do really is expand that base and maybe put more stuff into it or more military equipment. So I think probably Trump, probably being a deal maker, will go back to his saying, well, how much do you want? You know, he's already made one particular offer, and he will guarantee that the Greenlanders can each have X amount of money themselves, and they will boost the economy and make their lives more prosperous. And in the end, maybe that's the way he will do it.
However he goes about it, it won't be a popular move with the majority of Greenlanders, if the polls are anything to go by. And the Danes will be furious. We actually asked one Danish politician to send us a voice note about how the situation looks from there.
My name is Mogens Lykketoft. I'm the former foreign minister in Denmark and former president of the United Nations General Assembly back in 2015-2016. My reaction to Donald Trump's demand for taking over Greenland is that I think all the arguments about it is essentially wrong. It's not a question of defense, because ever since World War II, there are no limitations for American necessary presence for the security of the Arctic and of Greenland. And the other thing is, minerals are not an issue either, because according to the regulations in Greenland, everybody can invest in exploring the minerals in Greenland. It's a difficult issue technically because of the weak infrastructure and the ice cap and all that, but it can be done. So the reasons brought forward by the American president about Greenland are basically wrong, and is done in a very, very offensive way towards an ally in NATO, which has fought together with the United States for many, many decades. It's serious because we have seen that there's not a long way from what Trump says to what he actually does. So we feel it's an acute threat against the sovereignty of the Kingdom of Denmark and one of the three peoples living within the Commonwealth of the Kingdom of Denmark. We know that the huge majority of the Greenlanders, small people of only 57,000, is against being annexed by the United States of America. What Denmark should do now, I think the Prime Minister has been very clear also in stating that it will be the end of solidarity in NATO if this could actually happen. We cannot militarily fight against the Americans in Greenland. We will not dream about that. But we hope that the very, very clear declaration from the European Union and other European states will deter the American president. But it is a very dangerous and very depressing development we are seeing right now.
So the Danes clearly think it's unacceptable. But what are we hearing from inside the Trump administration? I mean, how likely is it that they will make a play for Greenland?
There are two key people at the moment. One is this guy called Stephen Miller, who is the Deputy Chief of Staff. He is quite a character, sort of Trump plus two, if you like. And he has basically said, you know, we need Greenland.
The president has been clear for months now that the United States should be the nation that has Greenland as part of our overall security apparatus.
And military force, of course, is one of the options.
So you can't take it off the table that the U.S. would use military force to seize Greenland. You can't take it off the table.
Jake, I understand you're trying very hard to, which again, is your job. I respect it. It's great to get exactly the headline, right? That catchy headline.
I'm trying to get an answer to the question.
That says Miller refuses to rule out the United States should have Greenland as part of the United States. There's no need to even think or talk about this in the context that you're asking of a military operation. Nobody's going to fight the United States
The White House press secretary has repeated that military option is one of the options. It is always possibly a last resort, but it's there for use. But Marco Rubio, who has so many jobs, it's difficult to list them all, but the two main ones are Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, has come up with a slightly less volatile option, which is the buying one. So he was saying yesterday that he thought the president would be interested in offering more money for Greenland, and that's what he would choose as an option. But that's Marco Rubio saying it, even though he's got the ear and eye and whatever of Trump and knows everything that Trump is thinking. Trump himself is very unpredictable, and he might just come out one day and say, I prefer Stephen Miller's option, and we'll just go in and take the whole place and see what happens next.
I mean, it has been a remarkable week of messaging from the administration. I think even Stephen Miller's wife, who most of us hadn't heard of before, appeared in all of this, but, posting a map of Greenland with a huge American flag superimposed over it. There is a sense that the momentum certainly seems to be building from the Trump side. The Danes aren't happy, and Europe is clearly very worried. I mean, just talk us through that. What are the discussions happening in Europe at the moment?
I think they're genuinely worried that Trump will ignore all the appeals to not to do anything against Greenland, and that he will go ahead and do something. And I think NATO and Europe currently at the moment feel pretty sidelined. All their efforts are being buried by this extraordinary momentum coming out of the White House, which is changing the world as we see it every day.
And the Danes have said that if America was to move on Greenland, that would be the end of NATO. That would tear it apart. Are they right?
No, I don't think it'll be the end of NATO. They will somehow come round to a form of words that will allow the alliance to continue. You can't have NATO just suddenly disappearing. And I think probably increasingly you're going to see people from NATO countries turning up in Washington and bending the ear of President Trump. I think Mark Rutte, for instance, the Secretary General of NATO, is going to probably play a role. Trump likes him and respects him. But right now, I don't think anyone knows what Trump is going to do. And of course, Europe is intensely worried about that.
Mike, you've been telling us about Greenland, which very much seems to be in Donald Trump's sights. He has also mentioned a number of other countries recently, though. I mean, how worried would you be if you were in Colombia, for example?
Actually, I think if I was in Colombia, I'd be more worried than anywhere else. He's mentioned Mexico and Cuba and whatever, and Canada, of course, initially. But Colombia, no. Colombia is run by a left-wing guy, a former guerrilla fighter, no great fan of Trump, and I think it's something like 90% of the cocaine that ends up in America comes from Colombia. So I think Trump would say, I'm going for Colombia because just like Venezuela, they're sending drugs to my country and my people are dying as a result. So I think Colombia would be next on his list, and the Armada is still there. However, there are elections due in Colombia at the end of May, and I think Trump might wait until that happens. And then will probably be playing a considerable role to make sure that whoever becomes the government is the one that he will like.
He's made some pretty inflammatory statements about it.
He has. He's been very rude about the president.
Colombian President Gustavo Petro, a couple weeks ago, he said he's got to watch his ass. And today he said he's not concerned about anything happening to him in the aftermath of this operation. So just what your message is about that.
He has cocaine mills. He has factories where he makes cocaine. And yeah, I think I stick by my first statement. He's making cocaine. They're sending it into the United States. So he does have to watch his ass.
He's made it clear that he doesn't think he deserves to be the president anymore. So when Trump talks like that, I would be fearful if I was the president of Colombia.
It does feel like a direct parallel to Venezuela.
It does. I know this guy hasn't achieved the sort of notoriety, if you like, of President Maduro. Nevertheless, this is a country which could not withstand the might of the United States of America.
And you mentioned Cuba. Talk us through that.
Cuba is in a very, very sad state. Trump has said this, that economically it's almost bankrupt.
Cuba looks like it's ready to fall. I don't know if they're going to hold out. But Cuba now has no income. They got all of their income from Venezuela, from the Venezuelan oil.
So I don't think he needs to do very much to Cuba other than just continue the sanctions which have been going on since, I don't know, it must be 60 years by now. I think he'll just probably harden that up and just force the country to collapse.
And the Cubans were involved with trying to protect the Venezuelan President Maduro. For them, this probably will be seen as a sign of their military weakness too.
Yeah, Maduro's had Cuban bodyguards for many years, and they put up a fight, but, it was 30 or 40 were killed. It was a bad day for the Cubans, no question.
And why does it matter to the Trump administration?
Sphere of influence, that's what it's about. Cuba has always had strong ties to the Russians, and that's bad news as far as he's concerned. Cuba's just down the road, and he and previous presidents, by the way, have said, we don't want Cuba to be a sort of a Russian island. I think Trump, more than any of his more recent predecessors, is more likely to do something about Cuba because, as I said, it's so close to the American shoreline.
And what about Mexico? What's the situation between America and Mexico at the moment?
I would say it's a fairly threatening atmosphere.
And by the way, you have to do something with Mexico. Mexico has to get their act together because they're pouring through Mexico, and we're going to have to do something. We'd love Mexico to do it. They're capable of doing it, but unfortunately the cartels are very strong in Mexico.
The problem for Mexico is that most of the drugs that we're talking about cocaine, fentanyl, and heroin, come through Mexico. Mexico is the staging post for all this stuff that comes across Latin America. So he has suggested on many occasions to the Mexican government, we want to send troops and we will attack the drug cartels in Mexico. And of course, the Mexican government has said, no, we don't want that. I think at some stage we might see that happen. They might cross the border and special forces might launch attacks on drug cartel installations and facilities.
And if American troops were there trying to do it, it would undermine their sovereignty.
It would do more than that, yes. It would destroy relations between Mexico and the United States.
Michael, you've been watching American foreign policy up close for many years now. If you're a betting man, which of those countries would you think they were most likely to do something about?
After Venezuela. I think he'll do something to all of them. He doesn't name countries and then do nothing about it. I think he will keep his eye on Mexico, and he will do something about the drugs that are coming in. He will definitely do something about Colombia, not necessarily military, but something will happen there. Cuba, as I said, I think he'll just wait and see what happens to the economy. But I think he is on a roll, and the huge success of the Venezuelan operation has given him the confidence to mount similar style operations in other parts of the Western Hemisphere. And I don't think he's going to be dissuaded from doing it if he thinks that is the only option left to him.
This is the president who was elected on putting America first, on ending wars. How are his base, his voters, how is the MAGA movement viewing this new muscular foreign policy?
I think they're probably very confused. A lot of them will be disenchanted, and we may see the result of that in the midterm elections in November. I think if you're a MAGA supporter living in, Texas, you will be saying, what is going on in Washington? This is a man who said, America first, great, but we don't want to have any more wars, thank you very much. And here he is involved in the most extraordinary display of military aggression that we've seen for quite some time.
And what about the rest of the American system? Because, the Donroe Doctrine wasn't openly talked about in the run-up to the election. This isn't something people necessarily thought they were voting for. Even the military, which you've seen up close inside the Pentagon for a number of years, how will they respond if they're suddenly told to invade Greenland, a NATO ally? Will there be pushback?
Well, the way the system works is if the commander-in-chief orders you to do something, you do it. And if you don't want to do it, you resign. Several top military commanders have emphasized that point, that we serve the Constitution.
General Mark Milley.
General Mark Milley, bless him, was always, we serve the Constitution, we do not serve the White House.
We are unique among militaries. We do not take an oath to a king or a queen, a tyrant or a dictator. We do not take an oath to an individual. No, we do not take an oath to a country, a tribe, or a religion. We take an oath to the Constitution.
But the fact of life is that if the Commander-in-Chief, supported by his national security team and possibly supported by elements of Congress, go for this option, then I think it will happen. And I can't see, I can't see thousands of Marines, for instance, saying we refuse to do it. It just doesn't work like that.
So is this the New World Order? Do we just need to start listening more to what Donald Trump says and taking it seriously?
We are in the new world, and if we don't take Trump seriously, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. The trouble for Europe particularly is that with the arrival of Donald Trump for his second term in the White House, they have tried, particularly Keir Starmer actually, have tried to make friends, flatter him, give him invitations to come and see King Charles, all this sort of stuff, which works with Trump, by the way. He loves all that. But then you've got to follow it through. And if it gets to a point where, Trump does something so outrageous, let's say that it actually does threaten the future of NATO alliance, will European leaders actually stand up and oppose Trump? I think Europe will need to stand up, have a much tougher position. They've been relatively tough on Greenland, saying, you can't do this, Mr. Trump. But actually, what will they do if he does do it? So I think for Europe, it's a shock. And the New World Order is not suiting their lives at all.
That was Michael Evans, contributor to The Times. The producers today were Olivia Case and Micaela Arneson. The executive producer was Tim Walklate. Sound design was by Tom Birchall and theme composition was by Mal Lassetto. If you can, do leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.